You are listening to the People First podcast.
People First is a self-advocacy group run by people with learning disabilities, and People First podcast is a platform to raise awareness about real issues that affect people with learning disabilities in our community and all around the world.
We aim to inform and entertain our listeners by interviewing interesting guests and talking about the things that really matter to us. This is like having a stage to speak out and get our voices heard.
Hello and welcome to the People First podcast. Today we will be speaking to Simone Aspis, who is a campaigner and advocate for people with learning disabilities. Simone has recently worked with us on the Heidi outer case, and we're looking forward to learning more about her and the things that she is working on at the moment. Hi Simone, we hope you enjoy being on the show today.
Could you tell us a little about your backgrounds?
So my name's Simone Aspis, and I am a disabled person who's been labelled by the education system as having learning difficulties. Sometimes people use the word people with learning disabilities. I really don't care what people use, to be honest, because it's actually the experience that I've had in facing discrimination throughout my life that has resulted to me having less opportunities than other people. Yeah. So I went to a special school from the age of 4, and I didn't get out of one until I was 16. There I had a lot less opportunities than what my brother had in accessing a range of subjects and the opportunities to be with other people, both disabled and non-disabled people, and the benefits that would come if I was within a mainstream education system. And nobody can take away the experience that I've had from segregation, from being taken away from my family, placed in a special school, and the discrimination that I faced after that. I grew up really feeling like I've been discriminated against as a disabled person. I wrote to the Secretary of State at 13 to ask me to get me out of a special school because I wanted to be in a mainstream school, just like my brother. Fair enough. I didn't know what support I might have needed, but I did know that I actually wanted to be in a local mainstream school, doing all the fabulous subjects my brother did in his school, and being with a wide range of children, and having all the extracurriculum activities that he had. So anyway, so I had a strong sense of disabled people's rights from when I was very young. It's not about what we can and cannot do intellectually or physically, but it's about the fact that we've been segregated from our society. It's a fact we've been discriminated against, and that's the common thing that brings us all together. Anyway, so a couple of years later, I came across this block telethon, direct action. So this was an ITV program, and it was basically an all-night fundraiser, basically begging on behalf of disabled people and presenting us as charitable cases. And this was before we had, disabled people had civil rights. So that was really my first part of court, my first contact with disabled people's activism was actually block telephone and saying, actually, I totally agree with this. Disabled people are portrayed in a patronising, dreadful, charitable way. And what we actually need to do is change the way society operates to make sure that we are included in society. So the first campaign I got involved in was Rights Not Charity. So that's where I began my campaign work. I got a job working at BBC called at that time was From the Edge and Does He Take Sugar? And I saw loads of people campaigning for disabled people's rights. And I just thought, I want to be involved in this, because actually I haven't had any of my rights. I've been discriminated all my life because there was no law in place to protect my rights to be included in mainstream education, to be able to take part in leisure activities, to be able to do the things that everybody else. So I joined People First after a spell at BBC, and that's where my life began, was being amongst our fabulous peer group. So I joined People First, and I ran the campaign to ensure that people with learning difficulties were included in anti-discrimination legislation. It was called the Discrimination Act at the time. It is now called the Equality Act. And at the time, the Discrimination Act was not going to include people with learning difficulties in it. It was only going to be people with physical impairments and people with visual impairments, but it's not going to include people with learning difficulties. So I was very much at the forefront of ensuring that we were included in that legislation. And what was really, really good was getting a whole lot of people with learning difficulties involved in that campaign. It was a bit of a challenge, because what happened with self-advocacy at that time was a lot of people were told, oh, you have the right to A, B, C, D. You have a right to education, you have a right to a sexual life, you have a right to relationships, you have the right to all these things. Actually, you had no right to anything because it wasn't in law. So a lot of the work that I had to be doing alongside campaigning around the civil rights laws was actually trying to go out there and talk to groups about the role of Parliament, what Parliament does, why laws are important, and why we need good laws, and why we need to start talking to our MPs, etc. And I really enjoyed it. It was really, actually, to be honest, it was the best part of my life, was actually doing that work. So the other big campaigns I worked with alongside that was working with integration, with the Alliance for Inclusive Education. And that was a campaign to ensure that disabled people had rights to inclusive education. And that was also proved to be very challenging, because we had to keep asking what we meant by inclusive education. Whose right, who were the holders of rights? So the campaign was about two things. It was about campaigning for disabled people's rights to be included in mainstream education. But the second bit was about the closure of special schools, because you could never have inclusive education if you allow mainstream schools and colleges and universities to stop people from going in to mainstream education because they're not clever enough. No. It is for our mainstream schools and colleges and universities to think how to include people with different abilities so that everybody is able to take part in learning. Because without us learning, education is more than just passing examinations. What kind of society do we really want? If we want an inclusive society, how can we do that if disabled and non-disabled people are not playing together, learning together, building relationships together, and working together? And we can see that as more and more attacks on our inclusive education, the harder it's become for disabled people to be more included within our society. And when more inclusive education happened in the 1990s, we were starting to make progress, wasn't perfect, about the inclusion of disabled people within all areas of life, including politics.
What campaigns are you working on at the moment?
The first campaigning I'm working on right now is a campaign that is being set up by Inclusion London, which is a organisation run by disabled people. And we're setting up a 3 Hour People campaign, which is about the campaign led by people with learning difficulties and autistic people. We are so I'm setting up a 3 Hour People campaign, which is about the moving of people with learning difficulties and autistic people out of these dreadful psychiatric hospitals into community care. So the 3 Hour People campaign is the 3 Hour People campaign is the campaign to move people with learning difficulties and autistic people out of the psychiatric system and moving them into, and supporting them to be, have homes of their own. And it's very much looking at, really, the ending of compulsory detention of people in hospitals, the ending of compulsory treatment of people in hospitals. I mean, it's absolutely appalling that people with learning difficulties and autistic people are locked up in hospitals just because they are disabled by society. No other group in society can just be detained in a hospital, in a prison, in any form of institution without due process, and on any other grounds on perceived risk. Second campaign I've worked on is around Heidi's court case, which you already know about. So my personal involvement in that campaign is I am very interested in medical ethics. So I am very interested in big issues around, should we treat people? Should we not treat people? Should people have access to abortion? Should people not have access to abortion? So I'm really interested in how medical decisions are made about our lives. So for a lot of disabled people, we're denied access to treatment. We are sometimes given treatment when we shouldn't do, i.e. women are still being sterilised as opposed to support them if they choose to have babies and to have children, etc. I was very interested in Heidi's court case because I am against laws that discriminate against us on any grounds, disabled people. And I don't care whether that discrimination happens after birth, during birth, or before birth, because it gives society a very clear message that if you allow discrimination in one area of our lives, then that allows discrimination in all our lives. And therefore, we should make sure that we are always treated equally throughout our lives. The Abortion Act at the moment allows for severely disabled babies to be aborted up to birth and 24 weeks for a non-disabled baby in most circumstances. Okay. And I believe the law must be the same for both disabled and disabled and non-disabled fetuses.
Why is it so important that we see the advocacy, rather than that people acting on behalf of people with disabilities?
I think it's really important. First of all, I think we need to be really clear what we mean by self-advocacy, because I think there is a lot of debate about what we mean by self-advocacy. So a lot of people think, oh, self-advocacy is, it's you, Daniel, it's me, it's Heidi, it's people that are verbal, can speak clearly, and we say what we want. We don't mince our words. But actually, self-advocacy for me is much more broad than that. It can be people that express themselves without using words. It can be the very simple, really important things like expressing, the choice of food you want. Actually saying, I don't feel comfortable with this touch or this way of you dressing me, or whatever that might be. And that might well be not only just speaking up using your words, but you use your face, you show anger, you show a level of happiness, whatever that might be. If you're happy with a touch, your face, you show how happy you are with your face. If you're not happy with that touch, you'll show how, you'll show your anger. If you don't like a particular type of food, etc. So I recognise that self-advocacy has to be seen as being more than it's simply just about the use of words. And actually, it's about also the very small things that we do in our day-to-day lives, but also the very big things that we talk about regards to getting changes within the law. Sometimes I recognise that I might not always understand what someone else with learning difficulties might be saying, because I'm not familiar with their body language. I'm not familiar with their speech patterns. Sometimes they make words that are not familiar to everybody, but they're familiar to the people that know them well. And therefore, I have no problem with somebody being facilitated to speak up, or it's interpreted to help me to understand what somebody is saying. And therefore, I think there needs to be a very difference between what we mean by somebody speaking up for somebody, as opposed to somebody facilitating somebody who is speaking up.
How can we encouragement other people with disability to use independence, accuracy?
I think first of all, we need to look at what we mean by advocacy and self-advocacy. That's the first thing we need to do. We need to take much more control over what self-advocacy and advocacy means, to make sure that includes everybody. I also think what we actually need to do is start from where people are at. So it's very much about recognizing that when that confidence in people's voices come from making changes and being able to speak up about the things that they think are important in their lives. We might be thinking there might be other things that are important in our lives, like laws and policies, but we also have to recognize that for some people, that actually what they do in their day-to-day lives is really, really important. And it's about recognizing and encouraging people to really, to be able to be involved in that. And it's also about recognizing that sometimes we might not get what we want, and encouraging people to, slowly build up the confidence to speak up, to get other people involved, so they can see their voice isn't just on their own, but they're with other people, and to support people to be in situations where they are able to advocate. And yes, there is some sense for some people that they will need some support from others around them to make some changes in the environment, in some policy, so that people are able to do the very important things that they want to do in their lives. And it doesn't matter what level it really doesn't matter what it's about. That's the question. It's about starting from where people are at. And really, it really starts from birth, for everybody. I mean, whether you're disabled or non-disabled, it is very much about supporting that to happen. And I also think that speaking up groups, could do more in working with children and young people to work on to support people to advocate for themselves. I know that will be a bit of a challenge, because there is a lot of parents who still are finding it hard for their children to speak up. I also think that a lot of parents still believe that they are the only ones that understand their own children. I haven't come up with any answers on how we deal with that. So, but it is something we need to recognise. How do we positively, are able to help people recognise that, will give us the skills and the knowledge to help their children to have a voice that is not only supported by their families, but also supported by other people, because families are not going to be there forever. So it kind of makes sense that whilst parents can still have a role, but for people, for people who are non-verbal, to also be supported by other people, so that longer term there'll be more people who will be able to truly represent the voice of who will be able to represent the voice of their children. I have no magic answer for that one, but it's something I think we need to do a lot more work on.
Why do you feel it is an issue that so parents are control the community of the children with disabilities?
I think there's big issues there. Of course, parents, when we talk about narrative, we're talking about storytelling. So we're talking about somebody telling our stories. Parents, do have a story to tell about bringing up children, whether they're both disabled children or non-disabled children. So I have no problem with this. And this is what I've been saying on Twitter. I can't deny your experience as parents, both in terms of your storytelling of your child, or in terms of the bigger storytelling of the history of parents' activism. Okay? Parents coming together to campaign for their children. I have no problem with that. Where the issue is parents do not see or do not even want to acknowledge that disabled people also have a story to be told. It may be the same story, but hey ho, it may be a different story. So, for example, my parents will always say to me, we brought you up and we have a story to tell about, you don't know how hard it is to bring up a disabled child, And I would always say, as a disabled person, I have a different experience because you were not locked up in a special school like I was, right? You were not you were not having your opportunities taken away from you. You were not getting abused like I am in my school, okay? And therefore, I have a different story to tell as a disabled person, okay? And my story is very similar to a lot of disabled people's stories of segregation, institutionalization and oppression. And we've developed a history that tells our story for many, many years. And it's the same theme, the same things that have come out from our experiences. And and that is very different from parents' experiences. Parents will very much look to the medical model. They very much look to their own experience of being with their children with very similar experiences of disability. They look to themselves, i.e. as parents, and they look to professionals to help them tell their story. Disabled people will tell their own story, and yes, we'll look to ourselves, not to our parents, because we recognise that we have a different experience to other people. And therefore, what you've actually got is two different stories being told. One by parents, and one by disabled people. And what I would like to see is actually, is there, and it's a question mark, is there common experiences that both parents and disabled people can draw upon, where we can say there are some common experiences that parents experience and disabled people can experience, but there are some differences about our experiences because we are parents and we are disabled people. And yes, there are disabled parents out there who will also be able to draw on their experiences as disabled people and parents as well. And that's really, I think, what I really want to try and really get over. And I don't know if I really want to call it control, because as soon as I call it control, my Twitter feed will be full of me accusing people of attacking parents. And I'm just not sure that's where I want to go. I'm really wanting to open this up to an acknowledgement that we all have different stories to tell. Can we come together and actually say, are there common things that disabled people and parents can draw upon?
What role do you think that groups like People First Keighley Craven have in supporting people to as their voice?
Yeah, I suppose for us, it's very much about getting out there and working with people with the role of our is really for us to represent the voice of our community for change. I think our role is definitely to be out there working with children and young people, wherever they are, to be developing and supporting their speaking up skills. I also think it is our role to be thinking about helping people to understand what disability equality means, what the social model means, help people to understand where they can around the law, knowing what their rights are. So really it is our role to go out there and educate our community, bring our community together to support people's voices to be heard. And I think it is about us to be there wherever that might be in supporting people to do that and to really be that voice that is, that represents what we want to see, change, and to recognise that actually, for a lot of people, it's not only just supporting people to understand, their own issues, but also to look at the common. It is our role to bring up, like, what are the common barriers that we all experience around and looking around an issue, and what are the big solutions that we could do. And learning from each other is also another really important thing. So, for example, like transport. there's lots of disabled people that have, that find going on public transport is difficult. So our role surely has to be about not only supporting people to really understand what is, the difficulties they have on an individual basis about, getting on the bus, being bullied by children on buses, forgetting your travel card, whatever it might be, but also bring us thinking about what are the solutions around really having inclusive, public transport where people feel welcome. And it is our role to actually bring people to actually go to authorities to be where we can hopefully make those kind of changes. So it's about not only about developing those self-advocacy skills for people within the organisations, but it's also about us going to Parliament, going to transport providers, and really seeking those kind of changes that are happening. Also, I think what's really important is peer advocacy. So for some people with learning difficulties, they may not feel confident to speak up themselves at that moment, but we can be a good role model, and we can speak up for somebody else about what they want, and hopefully for that process they can start slowly, taking on some of that responsibility when they can to be doing that. So it's about, for us, it's about, helping our next generation of people to develop their self-advocacy skills to make a difference.
How can we put advocacy in our women about if we have that right kit of steel?
So our history tells us that we can be effective. So we've done big campaigns in the past. So one's around getting people with learning difficulties into civil rights legislation. One's on direct payments. One's on the human rights campaigns. So we have had a record of good campaigning in the past. And I'm very hopeful with the climate we've got that we can be, that we are able, that we can really regain that energy and get out there and campaign for change. I think there's a real sense that is needed out there right now, with everything being so bad for lots of groups, particularly disabled people. And I think it's about what are the lessons that we can learn from when we used to do a lot of campaigning. And I think it's very much about coming together, building a strong voice, getting that out there on the streets, taking direct action, getting underneath the noses of MPs and politicians. And it's very much about our visibility. It's very much about us being out there, being seen, doing stuff, and absolutely challenging stuff at the same time. All the good things that we used to do at People First, it was magic. There was loads of people that used to just get out there and do stuff and actually be involved in the wider campaign work. And in some ways, one of the things I think, one of the reasons why I think Heidi's court case went to the Court of Appeal was because we were, that disabled people that were affected by the Abortion Act were actually seen and heard, actually both outside and inside the courtroom. So Heidi was in there addressing the judges. We were outside, being seen, talking to the media. That's a good example where I think the judges just got nudged, and the fact that we asked them for the easy read of the judgment, which we're waiting, and the fact we've asked them for, can we make the courts more accessible, were all the things that just made the judges just think differently.
Thanks for taking the time to speak to us tomorrow. We hope you enjoyed your time on the show, and we're sure that we'll see you again in the future. Good luck with your campaigning. Please like and share the podcast with your friends to help us grow. We are very grateful for all your support. Thanks for listening and see you in the next episode.